So anyway, I think we should start now because otherwise the workshop will be over time-wise. So my name is Mareen. I'm from the Pädagogische Hochschule Schwyz, and you can also see Jörg Bader, who works together with me in the assessment and grading in physical computing projects. And yeah, we came together today mainly with the aim to discuss some questions that we have, to talk about problems that we identified when teaching physical computing in schools, and also exchange ideas about difficulties that we have, share ideas, possible solutions maybe, hear about the experience that you have made in class, and also to find collaborators for future research, possibly, of course, depending on the interests that you have. And my idea was to first give you a brief input about what I understand by the term physical computing, and about the problems that we see with assessment and grading, before you can then yeah, just tell us what you have experienced, what your ideas are about assessment and grading. And then afterwards, I thought that we could split into focus groups, as we are just a very small number of people. Mainly, we just probably stick together as one group and discuss our ideas depending on different topics. And then I thought that we would come together again in the bigger group, which would then be the same. But we have to draw a conclusion in the end, so that we can maybe add a slide or two to the presentation that will be uploaded finally. Okay, so physical computing. It's a bit hard to explain without you seeing the slides, but physical computing, in my understanding, is a very creative activity. So in physical computing, learners mostly create interactive objects, which are programmed tangible media, interactive artifacts. They have sensors, they have actuators, they combine software and hardware components, and they run continuously, which means, as opposed to, I don't know, for example, a calculator or something, you do not just put something in and get a result, but you have an object that runs continuously until it is out of power or disconnected from the Wi-Fi or whatever. And such interactive objects, they can also communicate to each other, so they can form networks of interactive installations. And this is, yeah, what I very briefly understand when I talk about physical computing projects. That's interactive objects being designed. And concerning design, what is quite special about physical computing as opposed to, for example, robotics, is that we usually use methods from arts and design, that we use a lot of creative methods. Basically, we encourage tinkering, we let students create prototypes, so we do not necessarily have a final product in the end, but we have prototypes that grow and that become more advanced over the course of time. And also when planning the project, we rather focus on the ideas and not so much on the restrictions that we are given by the tools that we use. And then a third area of physical computing is the tools itself. So we do have a hardware side. For example, we could use programmable bricks like you would do in Lego Mindstorms. We could use microcontroller boards like the Arduino with components, sensors, actuators, etc. And that's what we mostly do in our projects. Or you could even use miniature computers like the Raspberry Pi, for example. Then you have the programming environment, of course. What we have focused on mostly is block-based programming, often Snap derivatives like Snap for Arduino or IoT Snap or similar tools. But of course, you could program interactive objects also with text-based editors or with flowcharts or whatever. And then, and this is, I think, also quite special about physical computing, is that we often use art and craft supplies. So you can make those objects with balsa wood, with cardboard, with foil cutters, scissors, and glue. This is something that is not so typical for computer science education in particular. And okay, I'm currently on slide number 3. So everybody who just joined, we do have problems. I can't be the host of this session for some reason. And I can't show you my slides for this reason through Zoom. So please refer to the link that Jörg just posted in the chat section. And we're currently on slide number 3, and I'm actually switching to slide number 4 now to just show you some of the projects that students of different groups have made. So you can see, for example, a smart city project in the top left corner of slide number 4, and also in the bottom in the middle, where we had students of different ages work together. I think they were from grade 5 to grade 12. So yeah, primary school level or lower secondary school level up to what we in Germany call the Abitur, or in Switzerland is the Matura, the A-levels equivalent. That was a very cool project where the students actually made interactive objects that communicated to each other. And then in some of the other pictures, you can see a piano project made from a school in Thailand that was presented at, I think, 2016 Constructionism conference, which was very cool. You can see a smart butterfly flower miniature arts project and other examples. And now I'm switching to slide 5. And what we see with physical computing as a current situation is that teaching physical computing can be quite diverse. So you have diverse contexts in which physical computing is taught, even diverse subjects. So you could have a physical computing project in arts classes, in technical classes. We do focus on computer science classes. And even within computer science, you can set very different focuses, foci. What you usually have as a project structure is that you start, as a teacher, you start with a motivation. So you explain the students why they are doing what they are doing. You might do this from a more technical perspective because you want them to learn about embedded system, for example, or you might do this from a very, just merely pedagogical perspective because your aim is to motivate students to stay on track with computer science courses, etc. You could do this through teacher explanations. You could let the students do some research and then present the results. You usually have some phase of technical introduction, but also there it can be very diverse. It could be closely guided by the teacher telling you every step to take, or on the other hand, it could also be very self-regulated so that the students start to tinker and explore the tools that they have. You can provide the same content for all. You can let the students work in focus groups, etc. And then there are some phases concerning reflection of what had been learned before, which is not always integrated into the lessons, but quite often can be seen. And then you have project planning. Again, this can be just a very rough draft to a very detailed project plan. It can be more or less, more or less specified. So it could be a very narrow specification of the program to be created, or it could be just a rough idea, basically. And then, of course, you have this phase of project work in which also learning happens a lot. And there again, you could give the students a very narrow challenge, like make a traffic light that is set on a corner where cars and bicycles don't want to collide, for example. Or you can have a very broad theme, like what we did, for example, with the Smart City project, where this theme was just to make a city smart, and students were very free to choose their projects within this broader theme. You can give very specific requirements, or the students have no constraints at all. And it's also possible to have objects that are purely artistic, while on the other hand, you can also have very useful applications, like a counter for the parking garage or something like that. And so this is the situation that we have in schools. And then now I'm coming to slide 6. In relation to this situation, we found out, and this is not a big surprise actually, but we found out that assessment of physical computing projects is not trivial. In fact, teachers perceive this as very difficult, especially computer science teachers. One of the reasons was that they are not so comfy with grading projects that have a creative character. So there's some art and design involved, and teachers cannot really they don't really know how to judge this if they are not an arts teacher. So they ended up very often by not grading the projects at all, or by maybe giving some grades, but doing so by feeling. So saying, oh, this looks cool, so you're getting a good grade, and this looks a bit crappy, so yeah, it's rather a bad grade. And in the interviews that those data come from, we also found that the more freedom the students had, the more difficult it was to do some written examination afterwards, to write a test paper where the students explain what they had done or something like this. But all teachers in the end agreed that they would like to have transparent criteria on which they could grade their students and assess the students' work. And they proposed some ideas. So for example, they thought it might be interesting to focus on the team working aspect. It might be interesting to focus on the final presentations that students gave or on the products that they created. But only very few teachers had some concrete ideas. And yeah, and also the design aspects, as I just said, were very difficult to evaluate for the computer science teachers. And this brings me directly to what I would like to do in this workshop together with you, namely share our experience and discuss ideas how we can tackle those problems. So our initial thoughts basically were, okay, if we want to provide teachers with some rubrics maybe so that they could yeah, just have a grid where they think, okay, I would like to focus on this competence and have the students learn about this or that content, then this might help teachers, but also learners. It could be used for self or for peer assessment. And if we want to do that, we need a competency model. So this is what we had just started working on. But the question is, do we actually need that, or do you maybe have other ideas? So what's your experience? I would very much like to open the discussion now to everybody who has something to contribute. Just, yeah, what have you done? Have you done any physical computing projects in schools, and which subjects have you done so, and how did you assess the students, yeah, learning the process that they made?
This is Sarah. I've not been able to, I've been meaning to introduce this in school. I'm hoping to be able to do that starting from September or January, but it's something that has been quite difficult to justify in terms of the curriculum and fitting it in, and then getting the actual components, you know, the microcontrollers or the Raspberry Pis or whatever you're using is usually quite not that easy to get. So it's harder to justify to the head of department that we need this much components really for a sensible scheme of work for physical computing. So which is why I'm here. All I've done is a tinkering really, but nothing with students. I've used physical computing in open evenings when you're demonstrating to prospective students what can be done and what can be achieved. But yeah, I'd like to learn more, and hopefully I think I've got an opening to using physical computing, so which is what I'm happy to learn today.
Okay, very cool. So could you maybe just give us a few words about your background? Where do you come from?
Computer science teacher. I'm joining you from London today. I teach 11 to 18-year-olds, but looking to teach 5 to 11 from September. So yeah, which I think if you can infuse them from the ground up, you give them that thirst for computer science, and hopefully that would pervade going forward, as opposed to leaving them late and not tackling them in primary school. So that's the aim. So I'm moving kind of, I'm moving to teach primary school students.
Okay, very, very cool, yeah. Anybody else with physical computing experience in the classroom?
Hi, my name is Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hello, hi, I'm from Singapore. I think in Singapore, I've been studying kids, how they do the MicroBit in the classrooms. In Singapore, I think the kids, they get about like 10 hours of training in using the MicroBits. And after that, they have to build a project in the MicroBits. So I've been studying how groups of kids actually work with the MicroBit, think about the projects and all that. And I do find that they do have some initial difficulties in starting off with physical computing projects because it's quite complex to them. There's so many parts to a physical computing projects. There's the sensors and the environment, even communication and all those things. So many times they are stuck, and they can't like really try to like in a way abstract like what's important from all these complexities. So they have some struggles. For example, and also another thing that they may not understand maybe how the sensors work. Like for example, they want to like collect certain data and maybe like for an environment. They don't really know, and that understanding of how the sensors work may somehow impede their ability to complete some of these projects. Yeah, this is some of the difficulties I found. Then also like when it comes to group work, there's only one person that's doing the programming. Yeah, and normally the best programmer will do it, and then the rest will. So if we are thinking if we want to get kids to all of them to sort of be involved in this coding, realize that only one kid will probably be involved, and the rest are just like building the models and all that. Yeah, that's what my observations are in Singapore.
Okay, can you, I'm not sure if you just told us, but can you just quickly tell us about the age group that you are teaching?
Oh, the age group is about 13 years old. Yeah. So they are like
Okay.
grade 7. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Right. Okay.
Anybody else who has something to share?
Yeah, maybe I'm Mareen and I'm from Heidelberg, Germany. Yeah, I'm not a ready teacher yet. I need 2 years, 2 more years. So yeah, I study at University of Education in Heidelberg, math, physics, and computer science. I have no experience in regular classes, but we have carried out similar projects outside of school or in voluntary work after school. Yeah, but maybe an interesting question is, what I think is, should we do computer science in physical lessons, or should we do physical things in computer science lessons? And this is a thing I often ask me, and I don't know, because I think also physical teachers should use computer science things, but I think it's also good to use computer science things, to use physical things in computer science. So yeah, I think these are similar things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's quite interesting. I mean, here in Switzerland, we have this Lehrplan 21, which basically gives us modules that need to be taught, and we do have computer science in all subjects somehow, but actually most of the teachers don't really teach any computer science issues in their subjects. So yeah, quite an interesting question too. So is there anyone in this room who has actually graded physical computing projects? Not really, right? Okay, because that's yeah, assessing these projects, that's what we are currently interested in. So how do we decide if a project that is, you know, big, beautiful, designed, but has just very little code, how do we assess that? So how do we tell the students, is this a good project, is that a bad project? For example, if it works perfectly well, should we give them a good mark, or should it be a not so good mark because from a computer science perspective, the code is not very rich, for example? Or yeah, how should we deal with that? Or how should we deal with students who focus very much on the programming and have a very complex program in the end that works, but their project is just a pile of blinking and moving physical elements that do not have any nice shape? Any opinions on that? Jatka, you just opened your microphone. Do you want to say something? No, okay.
Does that work now?
Yes, we can see you. Okay. We can hear you.
Somehow my microphone on the headset is not working. What I wanted to say is I think that definitely depends on what Verena was just elaborating on. I think if it's probably something from a physics lesson, blinking lights should have a little more value than if it's a computer science lesson, because the scripts are probably pretty boring. So I guess it depends on which subjects you're covering.
Yeah. Would you, this question goes to everybody in the room, would you agree that it would be good to have some you know, like a competency model for physical computing teaching and some rubrics that teachers could use to evaluate what the students are doing in class.
I feel that teachers would like that. I'm not sure if I like it, but teachers would definitely love it.
So what makes you, you know, why are you not sure?
About the whole competency thing. So I've been visiting a seminar recently where all teachers were super excited about a lot of projects because they covered all the competencies, and I found a lot of them very boring and not particularly real life connected. They were just covering the competencies, and I found that strange, but all teachers loved the project, so I'm not exactly sure about the whole competency thing.
Okay, yeah, I guess I get your point. Yeah, I think it's really important to have both things in focus, to both have the competencies that you want the students to achieve during the lessons, and also focus on, you know, the cool project theme, so that you keep the motivation upright and everything. So it's two things that you have to keep in focus, basically, I guess.
I think personally it would be nice to have some way of assessing whether or not they're meeting your competency. There's got to be a way to check their understanding and know whether or not they're making progress, and just test what their knowledge is. So yeah, I think some way of assessing that will be really useful. There's got to be that, so you've got to know. For instance, I think Peter did say his students struggle because they can't really make that link when it comes to computer science or the physical computing world. They can't make the link between the fact that the sensors are collecting data, so that's just so abstract to them. So there are many other links they would need to make which are not making. So it's nice to be able to assess them and know what we're looking for and what they're learning. So in short, yes, I think that will be very useful, please.
Yeah, making those links, that's one of the interesting aspects. So when I did some research on physical computing, in one of the project groups that I taught, I had the students draw concept maps. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but you might Google it, where they, you know, visually represented what they had learned by explaining their projects in a concept map. And it was quite interesting to see the different levels of abstractions that the students took. So some used really technical terms to describe what was happening in their interactive object, while others just wrote, well, there is a door and it opens when the sensor feels the light, or something like that. So some basically described what they could see when they looked at the objects, while others more took the engineering perspective and described what was behind the projects. And I think this kind of using concept maps might help in assessing the students' understanding in this way. But on the other hand, I also learned through the concept mapping activities that you should not take too much of those concept maps, because some kids just don't like you know, drawing a concept maps and finding the correct terms. If they can just write it does this, A does B, it's a lot easier to write in a concept map than explaining it in technical terms. So if students created bad concept maps, this, in my opinion, does not necessarily show that they haven't learned what they should have learned. So if you try to use those for assessment, you should be careful with the interpretation of the results. And also it needs a lot of training. So you cannot just let students draw a concept map when they had never drawn one before. But it is quite interesting, especially looking at the better ones. Yeah. So I was wondering if in this group we might be able to split up into teams. Could I maybe just get a quick opinion by having those people raise their hand who would like to discuss in more focused groups now? Or maybe I should explain the focus groups first. So our idea, our idea was to split into groups and discuss yeah, by either by age groups or by subjects or by topics. So first we thought it might be interesting to have people come together who work for K to primary education, and then another focus group who focuses on lower secondary education, and then another focus group focusing on upper secondary education. Or we could have a focus group which discusses different subjects of assessment, like work processes or the final project or something like that. And we left that very open in our idea finding, because I thought it would be best to do this based on the interests within the participants of this meeting. So my first question again is, do you think it is reasonable at all to split into focus group, as we are only 6 people in this room? So who is in favor of doing so? Okay, I see no hands, which probably means
I think we're small enough group. I think we can probably, it's nice to listen to what others are talking about, and we can maybe move quickly from one topic to the next, maybe, since we're not that many. So.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was guessing from no one raising its hand, and actually it's also what I think is most reasonable with this group size here. Okay, so I know that Sarah, you were in primary education, and I think Peter was in grade 7, so that's not too far from
secondary. Secondary moving to primary.
Ah, so okay.
Yeah, going up, down.
Ah, okay, I'm sorry, then I
yeah, that's all right. Yeah.
I just remember the primary aspect. So is there anybody here interested in K to primary education, so kindergarten to primary?
So that's just me then.
Yeah, that would be just you. Okay. Do you have anything that you would like to discuss with this special focus?
I think really, how do you introduce physical computing? Thinking of just listening to your presentation now and linking it to one that I attended about a couple of days ago to do with simulating a city where you had renewable energy. I think that would be kind of a good link, because it's got the concepts of renewable energy source, it's got the concept of simulating this sources, and you can talk about maybe the data you gather. So it's more like inputs and outputs as well. You can link it to some physical world. So I think that would be a good link, perhaps using Snap to introduce such simulations before moving on to maybe building physical computing projects. But it's also, I think, lacking being able to give the students the very basic in terms of what circuits are all about, what inputs in the physical worlds are and what outputs are, will be a good way to maybe breaking down that level of abstraction. So that's what I'm thinking. So it's having kind of a curriculum that can take them there in steps, and then introducing the projects so they can begin to make meaning. I think it's important if we can do this in primary school, because it gives them the good foundation to move on. So when they get to Peter's stage, it's not so abstract. I think the problem is computer science can be so abstract. They don't have any link to their real world to grasp onto what they're trying to learn. So that's my thinking. That's what I'd like to know. How do you introduce them? What level of making can you allow?
Okay, maybe I think it's very important to raise this question. That's absolutely clear, and I think you're having a very good point there concerning the abstraction level. I cannot speak for primary education, to be honest, because I have never taught a primary education class. But I know that there are people also in or around London, like for example Sue Sentence and what's her name?
Yeah,
Sue Sentence and her former doctoral student. What's she called?
Katrina or something. Who are you?
No, that's not the one I mean. Anyway, Jane Wade, exactly.
Yeah.
Jane Wade.
Oh, Jane
exactly.
Wade. Yeah, I know Jane.
Yeah.
And I trained on the Sue Sentence. She's moved to Cambridge now. Yeah. So I know them both. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are definitely people to connect to. And yeah, I think what is important is also, despite thinking about, you know, how to teach it, it's also important to choose the right tools to teach. Because if you go to primary school students and show them a Raspberry Pi and a pile of loose sensors and actuators and wires and some, I don't know, resistors and whatever you might need, that probably won't work as well as if you used something that has those sensors and actuators pre-assembled, like for example the Grove kits. I'm not sure if you know them, but you can buy an Arduino board or a Raspberry Pi or whatever microcontroller, and Grove provides pre-assembled sensors and actuators that you can just easily connect to those controllers, which makes it very easy to get started for the students, and they don't have to be concerned with the wiring, and they just connect the LED to a certain pin. And then if you use Snap or a well, for example,
sorry, what was that? Sorry to interrupt. You said the Grow kits. Did you say Grow?
Grove starter kits.
Growth. Okay.
It's green boxes. Yeah, thanks Yatka for posting that to the chat. And they actually, let me see. Unfortunately, don't have a kit here, I'm afraid. No, but yeah, they are very nice because you don't have to, you know, think about the wiring. You don't have to do anything with those fiddly parts, and that's very, very helpful. And then in primary school, you could start even on a lower level concerning the tools by using something like the MicroBit, for example, where you have sensors and actuators on board and you just can connect it and program it. That makes it even easier, but you cannot, you know, so easily add additional components. So for that, I would definitely recommend Grove. Yeah.
There's also this one board from Germany, which I'm not sure that I like, but the Calliope, which is especially, or they claim it's especially designed for third graders or for primary education. And that also has those Grove connectors to connect more Grove sensors.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I was attending some CSTA conference, I think a few weeks ago, and I came across one of these presentations. It's quite interesting. It's called craft computing. Yeah, it's sort of unplugged methods, unplugged approach to introducing younger kids and even teachers the idea of physical computing. So I mean most people will think that computers would need screens and keyboards and all that. So they introduce the idea of what a computer is, and they sort of get them to introduce the idea that a computer is like a box. You can do many things with it, and ask the kids, what do you like to do with the computer, or what? So the kids will imagine and say, yeah, I want to do this with the lights turn off and all those things. So what they did was they built a computer out of cardboards. Yeah, and they sort of create sensors. They design their own sensors and link it to the computer with like wires and all those things. So it's just imaginary make play with making us crafts. So the idea is actually to introduce them the idea of what physical computing is before they sort of get into like the real hardware and the software. They even have like sort of you know the scratch cards or the snap cards you have, put them together. If something happens, you do this and all that. So they sort of introduce the kids to some of these ideas of what computing is. They call it craft computing. Yeah. So it's quite an interesting idea. Yeah.
Can you maybe post the name of the authors or something?
Yeah, I'll try to post. I'll see where the notes are, then I'll try to post it in here. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments on primary education? If not, then I would like to switch or move forward to lower maybe and also upper secondary education, because I think we are not too many people. So what do you think are the main differences? What is different in secondary education as opposed to primary education?
People had physics lessons and know how circuits work.
Yes.
Yeah, true. I'm just thinking in terms of assessment and grading. So is there anything, so what makes it easier for us to judge as teachers? And yeah.
I'm sorry that I'm talking all the time because I'm not even a teacher and I have no idea about grading, but what I could think of is that you can give more specialized requirements. So for example, I require you to use one sensor, and I require you to make a switch that has to have an if statement, for example. And I'm not sure if that works in primary school, that you can make such specific recommendations on what kids should do. And I guess that works better in at least middle school.
Do you think that it would interfere with the students being very creative in their projects? Because I am absolutely pro letting the students do the projects that they want to make.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think grading and assessment works against having people to do what they want to do. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, no, but not grading and assessment, but you know, giving some requirements. Do you think that this is too much of interference, or is that okay, in your opinion?
I think it depends. So telling people that they should include a switch, I guess, is okay, because there are like 500 projects that I could count up that use a switch, and then you have to use an if statement for that, for example. So I guess I would be fine with that, making it more concrete. So yesterday we were in a talk, and then there was one guy from the PH also telling us that now for the middle school final exam, you have to connect one sensor and 2 actors, or 2 actors and 1 sensor, and not more and not less. And I'm not sure if that's helpful. I think this is not helpful, actually.
That's true, yeah. Any other comments in this direction? So what can you do to make it easier for teachers to grade physical computing projects? What would you focus on actually if you were in the situation that you had very cool projects made by your students? What would you focus on when you would definitely have to give them a grade? So it's not your choice if you give a grade or not, but you have to do it, and you want to do it, you know, the most fairest way.
I think that the most difficult thing is that teachers don't have much time through the year, and I think the project have to fit into the curriculum, and lots of project doesn't fit often in a curriculum, because then they need I think 2 weeks or whatever, and then you lost time for some other subjects, and I think this is very difficult for most teachers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But let's assume you have the time, you have the space, you have everything you need. You can make your project in class, and you're at the point that the students need their final grade for the project. So what are the aspects that you would focus on?
So sorry, can you just, I'm just thinking, can you repeat your question again?
So
please?
I am assuming that we have a setting where we are absolutely free. We do have the time and the space to do a physical computing project where the students create something together. So they might work in teams focusing on projects that belong to a bigger project, like in the smart city example that I had shown earlier. And so it's not a matter of time, of resources or anything, but we can do those projects. The only thing is that we have to definitely give the students a grade in the end. So how do we get there? What are the aspects that you would focus on?
I think you mentioned something about, do you focus on the physical build bit, or do you focus on the programming aspect, whether or not they've been able to program properly? And I think it really depends. Again, maybe because as teachers, you're constantly thinking, how do I plug this into the curriculum, and are they learning? Are they making progress in terms of what they need to know? Well, it really depends on the challenge, what the objectives are. And I think if you set what the objectives are and the competence, if you're learning to build and you're using sensors, then you would expect that they understand how the sensors work. They can articulate or abstract the fact that they're collecting data with using sensors. And before moving on, so I think it really depends on the stage, because I think each week or each level will have its own objectives and what you want them to learn. So it's really focusing on what you have set there. Really, I'm not sure if I'm being specific or still being vague, but I think assessing really depends on whether or not you're focusing on the programming aspect. If you're more or less trying to get them to learn programming within your curriculum, then maybe perhaps you're not going to focus much on how beautiful the structure is, or how well they've built that physical structure, or whether or not they've got the concepts of the circuits right, and whether or not they can actually articulate and link all of them together. So I think it really depends what you're trying to grade. So it may vary. I'm not sure if anyone has any ideas.
Yeah, so it kind of matches my observation that there might not be the one physical computing assessment rubrics, because as you say, you can put your focus so differently, and you can either focus on, you don't know, the programming part, the embedded systems part, how well do students understand the concepts of embedded systems design, like do they meet real-time requirements, for example, which would be probably a too advanced concept for primary or lower secondary education, but it might very well be discussed in upper secondary education, stuff like this. So probably when we think about a competency model, we should also be aware of that and think about different levels. And yeah. So would you, I'm not sure how to bring together the physical part and the programming part, because you do have bugs on both sides that students have to cope with in the lessons. They have to master on both levels. So is it even possible to, put that together, or should that kind of be two separate things that you talk about?
I think it might be possible, but then it's really a long-term goal, because I think it's something they need to build over a long period of time. If circuits aren't taught very well, or they don't get the necessary background in primary school, in terms of, because the focus sometimes is just on maths and literacy and English, there's not a huge deal of focus in science and other aspects. So it's really difficult, because they come with such a narrow focus, and then we've got very little time. Like Verena was saying, there's very little time to squeeze everything in. So even though you want to teach it, they don't have the time to tinker. So tinkering, it's sometimes a luxury. You don't have that time to tinker. So do you make it heavily teacher-led, or do you make it more student focused? So if you make it student focused, you will need a lot more time. And so how do you get the balance? So it's yeah. So there may not be an easy answer. It'd be nice to have one, but then it's something that would constantly evolve, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, Peter just posted the link to the presentation that he mentioned earlier. Thanks, Peter. Okay. Do you think, or can you think of any, I don't know, of any subjects of assessment? So we said we could focus on the programming. We said we could focus on more or less the hardware in terms of possibly the correct wiring or something. What else is there that we could focus on?
The process on how people build stuff. So maybe how they evolve their project, let's say. That's probably a little more complicated, because then you have to follow along all the time. But I mean, from my personal experience, when I work with Arduinos, it takes a lot of time and sometimes nothing happens because I just don't get the board to run or to do what I wanted to do. But still, I wouldn't consider that as a completely failed project then for kids in school. So maybe something that follows along, that something like a diary that they have to keep track on and write down what they've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's also a good point, because it happens every now and then that a project isn't finished or doesn't finally do what it's supposed to do or what it was supposed to do based on the initial idea, and ideas evolve as well. So even when in the very beginning you talk to the students about their project ideas and set the criteria for the specific projects for each student group, things change over time, and then the criteria might no longer be valid in the end. That's also something that you have to keep in mind when you make those criteria, for example. Yeah, of course, the process, it's very important. I think there's also a lot of is it tools? I'm not sure if tools is the right term, but there are aids that you could use to evaluate processes of students, and also to have the students evaluate each other in their teams, how they contributed to the overall product and to the process. Yeah, you could also possibly focus on the presentation of the product and have the students not only present what their interactive object is doing, but how it works. So I have made quite good experience with that. Actually not for assessment, but when we had school projects where there was a very public presentation of the overall project in the end. And so the parents came in and the students had to explain to the parents what they had been doing the last couple of days. And it was very interesting to see how different students explained the different projects, and you could really sense who was really involved in their project and who was rather involved on a, well, superficial level, so to say. So this might also be a point of assessment, the presentation of the product in the end. So what about written examination? Do you think it's reasonable to do written examinations after physical computing projects? Is it even, you know, okay to do so because students do different projects? Can you do the same written examination for all students afterwards, or is that not so good?
I think you can have written examinations at different aspects. It could be you could be focusing on the circuit, or how to wire up a breadboard correctly, or what the what your typical component might look like, what features you have in a microcontroller. So that would be nice. I think the examination and quizzes and such questions would help, because it helps them make sense and it forces them to learn what the technical terms are. So I think, yeah, there could be an exam on it. It'll be nice to have one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I normally ask students what are the challenges they face in building their projects, and to get a sense how do they overcome it. So that's one way to maybe get them to write or reflect, or just to interview them. Another way is to maybe what ideas do they have even after that, or how do they keep on improving those ideas they have in the projects. Like, for example, how they go from, let's say, for example, when they finish this, how did they have new ideas, how do they evolve, and how do they actually develop these new ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Well, I think we have to wrap up this session so that you have enough time to move to the keynote. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for participating. I was a bit worried that no one might show up, but I'm glad that some people actually found their ways into the room. I'm just trying to think of a conclusion from this session. So for me, it was quite interesting to hear the different perspectives. I was kind of hoping that we would leave having our research plan, you know, put in stone. That's definitely not the case, but all the discussion here has supported my and probably our impression that it's not so easy, and that it's not, that you cannot just say this is physical computing and this is how to grade it, but it's really very context specific. There are many different things that you could focus on, and I think we will continue with what we have just started with Jörg, right? So to think about what are content-wise, the aspects that are core to physical computing from a computer science perspective, from the embedded systems perspective, maybe also, and to figure out what those key competencies are that students gain apart from what they gain in programming lessons, etc. So trying to find out where the extra bit is. And yeah, I hope that you also took something from this workshop and it was interesting for you as well. I would be happy to answer any questions later if you just send me an email. Unfortunately, for time reasons, I cannot participate in any further sessions today, so I also won't be able to hang out in the hallway now. But yeah, you can contact me on my email address, which is on the website. And I wish you very nice further sessions at this NetCon, and thank you all for participating again.
Thanks, Mareen.
Thank you,
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mareen. Thank you, Mareen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.